Hi, I want to welcome you. This is a Gubernatorial Candidate Forum hosted by CD2 DFL. I'm Sue Moravec. I'm the chair of the 2nd District DFL. I want to welcome you to our Gubernatorial Forum today. All 6 declared candidates for the DFL endorsement are here with us, and we're honored to have you here. First, I want to thank the committee that helped to put this together. Vita Konitz, Sue Rasmussen, Austin Balhagen, and Kayla Berg were very helpful. I want to thank the Farmington School District. We're going to start by having each candidate introduce themselves. We'll start with Paul Thissen as our first candidate.
Well, thank you all for coming out. I really appreciate the chance to speak with you, and I look forward to the conversation. You know, I confess that I've been waking up at night, and I have for the last several years, thinking about a couple of things. And one of the things that woke me up last night was there was an article in the New York Times yesterday that said that there's 5.3 million people in the United States, about the population of Minnesota, who live in deep poverty, meaning they live on less than $4 a day. And if you think of what that means for those families and what it means about our society, I guess the reason I bring it up and the reason I was thinking about it last night is we've had a lot of these forums, and we talk about a lot of issues, but we haven't, as Democrats, been getting at the fundamental issues that really matter to the structure of what's going on in our society. And until we step up and start asking those harder questions about how we reformat the structure of our society, we are not going to convince people that they should come out and vote to us, because what we're talking about sometimes doesn't matter. So I hope this debate gets at that, and I look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
I am Rebecca Otto, running for governor. I've had the honor of serving as your state auditor now for almost 12 years, or 3 terms. I have an exciting agenda that's been informed by our fellow Minnesotans statewide. Started a listening tour back in January of 2017, 36 different community conversations, 2 hours plus apiece, to work to understand Minnesotans' hopes and dreams, as well as their concerns and struggles. And my agenda is informed by that. It's called Renew Minnesota. And there's 3 main parts right now. There will be 2 more soon. 1, to get at climate change in a meaningful way. We should be leading the nation in the clean energy economy. There's great jobs to be had. We can transform what we're doing. We can lower our living costs, and we can have free energy forever. The 2nd, getting to a universal, publicly financed, guaranteed quality, affordable healthcare system, which is going to be transforming for our economy, for families, because your socioeconomic status right now determines your health. And finally, raising the wage to $15 an hour and 2 years tuition free, so that we make sure we've leveled the playing field, that we have equality opportunities.
Well, thank you so much, and it's great to see you, and great to see Moms Demand Action in the audience. Thanks for being here. Well, once again, we as Minnesotans realize that we can survive when the Vikings blow a big game. But we do also know that we will not survive the quality of life that we have in the state of Minnesota unless Democrats win the election in the fall and hold on to the governor's office. We have got to win this election. And the fact of the matter is we need a champion. We need a champion for the progressive values that have made Minnesota great, a champion for clean air and clean water, a champion on the fight against climate change, a fight for racial equity, for common sense gun laws. That's the champion that I've been as mayor for the last 12 years. That's the fight I want to take across the state of Minnesota. I want to be your champion as the governor of this incredible state and fight for those progressive values that we have all been able to take advantage of over these many years. Generations of folks before us have built up what we have in the state of Minnesota. It will only take 1 legislative session to take us down if we lose. We need to win this one. I want to be the winner.
Time.
Well, thank you all. Thanks to CD2 for putting this on, and to each of you, thank you for believing in our democracy. Thank you for taking time out of your busy lives to come here and to participate in making our state and country better. I'm Tim Walz. I'm a public school geography teacher from Mankato, a retired sergeant major in the artillery, a football coach and prom builder, a dad, and husband to Gwen. And 12 years ago, I believed that we could do better. I took a progressive message that we need to make sure that wages are being raised and the right to collectively bargain is something that's protected. Making sure our neighbors, no matter who they loved, have the opportunity to marry who they were. Making sure women had the right to make their own health care decisions, and that we added millions of people on to be able to get that health care. I'd like to try and be your governor because I know we can take this message out there. I believe in this state. I believe in that bold north we talk about. We are people that solve problems. We can take a message to places where they're not listening now, but they know these policies matter. This is not about a Democrat winning. This is about Minnesota winning based on the values that build strong communities. Join Peggy and I on this journey. We will do this in 2018. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Erin Murphy. I am a registered nurse and a teacher. I am a mom of Anna and Bridget, and I'm a state legislator. I'm running for governor. I'm running for governor because I believe in a kind of politics that improves people's lives, and when we use that together, we can build a bright future for everybody in the state of Minnesota, and I want to do that with you. I chose nursing because I care a lot about people, and I'm involved in politics for the very same reason. I left the practice of bedside nursing to work for the Minnesota Nurses Association, and I did that for 14 years. And in 2004, when I took care of my mom at the end of her life, while she had worked very hard to earn her way and build a good life, she still had to fight with the insurance companies to get the care she needed. And at her funeral, her sister said to me, "Go fix that." And I ran for office and got myself elected. And for the last 11 years, I have been working with the people of Minnesota all over the state of Minnesota, and they have been my very best teachers. It is the preparation to do this job and do it well. I look forward to our afternoon together. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Tina Liebling, state representative from Rochester. I'm really glad you decided to come in from the beautiful day to be with us. So I'm the first Democrat to be elected in Olmsted County ever on that ticket, and I'm a bold progressive. I won as a bold progressive. And the reason I'm in this race, I'm the only one who was a Bernie Sanders supporter. And I was a Bernie Sanders supporter not because I liked his hairstyle, but because I thought he was talking about the real issues of the country. And they're still the real issues: the concentration of wealth and power in very, very few hands, and the fact that ordinary folks can no longer get along, that wages are depressed, that right now a living wage in the metro area is about $19 an hour, not 15, so it's not good enough to say to people, over 5 years we're going to get you up to 15. We need to be talking to Minnesotans about what's really going on, concentration of wealth and power. We need to focus on clean energy. We need to focus on racial justice. We need to focus on decent gun policy to stop having these terrible killings in our schools. And I'm a bold person. I can't be bullied or intimidated. And it's not enough to win, for a Democrat to win. We have to have a governor who's going to stand up and fight for these issues. And that's who I am, and that's why I'm running. Thank you very much.
Now, just very, very quickly, in only a few words, the first question that we'll ask, and Paul, you'll be the first person to answer this question, is will you abide by the DFL endorsement?
I will abide.
Yes.
I have not made that decision because the most important thing is that we win in November and we govern to our progressive values.
There will be a primary, and I'll defend my endorsement in it.
I will abide by the DFL endorsement, and frankly, if you can't win it after campaigning for a year across the state of Minnesota, can you actually win the general election?
That is my intention.
To abide? Thank you. Okay, now, Rebecca, you're going to be the first person to answer a question. Women in Minnesota are paid 81 cents for every dollar paid to men. For Latina women, it is 51 cents a dollar. Asian women earn 71 cents per dollar. African American women earn 62 cents per dollar paid to men. And American Indian women earn 57 cents to the dollar paid to men. This is according to the National Partnership for Women and Families and the American Association of University Women. How will you address this disparity?
So I have a plan for this. First of all, we need to raise the minimum wage, period. We value work in Minnesota, and if you're willing to work 40 hours a week, you should be able to come close to supporting your family. $15 an hour is not a living wage, but we have got to start somewhere. And I had an editor from a large newspaper say, "Is that enough?" And I said, if the legislature wants to do more, absolutely, but you've got to start somewhere. But it's a real issue. Now, I can tell you, as the state auditor in my office, we have a lot of women in management. So I don't think we have any pay equity issues in the office. But part of it is making sure that women have those opportunities to be in leadership roles, that, you know, some of our most low-income Minnesotans tend to be women of color, immigrants, and so this $15 an hour piece would be meaningful for many people in our state. But we've got to get to that equality of opportunity, and frankly, in 2018, we still have this issue. And also, I think the Republicans have weakened some of the reporting requirements for local governments in terms of reporting, so we still have more work to do. And frankly, I don't think it's a bad idea to have a woman as governor, because we can actually lead and talk about this issue.
Well, wage disparity is based on gender, based on race, based on national origin, must be outlawed, and those laws must be enforced. And as governor, you can count on me to make sure that we're going to go after any employer, whether it is a governmental unit or whether it is a private sector employer, that is discriminating based on gender or race or national origin when it comes to wages. But the wage disparity that we're seeing, where women are being paid 81 cents on the dollar to what a man is earning for a similar job, also extends to teachers who are being paid half of what someone similarly educated would be being paid if they were in a different field. It extends to the fact that the average CEO is making 300 times what the average worker is in this country. And you want to know why people are frustrated? They're frustrated because they continue to work harder and harder, and they see that they're being treated unfairly. They see that they're facing discrimination in terms of wage disparity, and they see that they're fighting harder and harder to just keep up with the bills, with the mortgage payment, putting food on the table, paying for their kids' school. We need to reverse the inequalities in this country. I think it begins with making sure that we help people enter into a union workforce. If you look at the wage discrepancies in this country, it really started to take off when the trade union movement started to decline. So union membership started to get lesser and lesser in terms of the overall workforce, and wage inequality started to grow. And if we have people that are standing up, fighting for women, fighting for people of color, fighting for people that are that are from some other country, that are immigrants to this country, then we're going to have this disparity that we're seeing eliminated, and certainly at least lessened if we can't completely eliminate it. But the governor's got to lead on this issue. He's got to stand up for unions. He's got to stand up for the law, and he's got to fight like hell to make sure that people are treated fairly when it comes to getting paid for the work that they do.
Right now, I represent the second most Republican district in America with the Democrats sitting in it. When I won that district in 2006 with grassroots organizing, I was the second Democrat in 125 years. Of the first 3 votes I took, one was to raise the minimum wage for the first time in 10 years. The second was the Lilly-led Better Fair Pay Act. This issue in here, and you're going to hear, we know this is the choir. We know these things are true. We need these things have to be fixed because they have the corrosive effect on our society, on the middle class, and everything else. The issue is, how do we take our message out there? The one thing I would tell you is Republican women are being paid 81 cents on the dollar, too. We need to make the case and take this out there to people that this is not just this disparity is impacting the people they think it's impacting all of our communities. It's reducing purchasing power. It's reducing the opportunity for people to choose careers or further their education. So as governor, you need someone who can take the message to the people who are going to most benefit by this, the people who can help us build the coalitions necessary to make it politically untenable for Republicans to say it's okay to discriminate against someone in wages. It's okay not to provide those opportunities. And when you have a governor who is a union member, we need to organize. The greatest protection we have of this is organizing our workplaces to collectively bargain to push back at that, to say this is not happening to our brothers and sisters. It is not happening to our coworkers. So I would ask all of us here, we are going to have to put together a campaign that pushes back on all these things. This is the ultimate goal, to transfer wealth away. They talk about, oh, you're always talking about an economic war. If that's true, they're winning it right now, because we have to get to those very people who are in the middle class or aspire to the middle class. So as your governor, of someone who knows that my family benefited by being in a union family, my family benefited that my wife was paid fairly, and when she got pregnant, she could have her job back. I will advocate for those things, but not just to ourselves, but to those very people that we need to get, not just to win elections, but to change the economy.
Iceland made it illegal to pay women less than men just recently. How about that for a standard? You know, I am a labor leader and come out of a female-dominated profession, so I am very well aware of the power of organized labor to advance equity in the workplace. But we haven't closed the gap yet, especially for women of color, and we have work to do in the state of Minnesota. When I think about work that I have done since I have been elected, working with my fellow legislators up here and passing the Women's Economic Security Act to tackle pay equity, working with my colleague Rena Moran, who focused specifically on women of color and advancing their economic security. Those are measures that we can continue to push as we move forward on this issue. But there are 2 things that I think are particularly instructive on this front. Reproductive freedom and access to contraception are important fundamental ingredients for women in the workplace. It allows us to choose when we're going to have our children and stay in the workforce. In this last stinky election, Minnesotans delivered to our House DFL caucus, the most diverse caucus that we have ever had, 29 men and 28 women, 5 people of color, 4 Native women, 3 out lesbians. And that has transformed the conversation inside our caucus. Adding seats at the table to make sure our voices are all represented is the way we transform and change the direction of our country. I've seen it in our caucus. I am seeing it across the state of Minnesota. And it is time to make sure that there are more women elected to office, to local office, to school boards, to the state legislature, and to the governor's office, because then we will put those issues front and center, not necessarily being represented by others who share our view, but to bring our own lived experience to that discussion and bringing our own lived experience to the people of Minnesota and persuading them in the change that we need.
The very first thing we have to do is enforce our laws. And that means funding our Department of Civil Rights, which has really been underfunded for quite a long time. I don't hear the Republicans saying it's okay to have these disparities, but I do see them doing things like cutting the budget for the enforcers of the law. So that's something that we have to do. I've been talking to people in my district for a long time about equity. I've got a district where about 40% are still Republicans, but you know what? People are starting to understand that the demographics of our state mean that if we don't have equity in the state, we're all in trouble. This is not about being good people. This is about making sure that we have a really good, well-prepared workforce into the future. We need women in every profession. We need people of color in every profession. And we're just not going to be able to function in the global economy unless we have everybody coming together with all the skills and talents that we all have. Of course, there are many things that are really hard to tackle that create these inequities, and it's obviously not a simple solution. We've heard some things here. One of the things I'd like to do is start focusing more on small businesses in the state so that people have the opportunity to start a small business and grow it themselves. We give a lot of resources to the big guys, to the corporate entities. We give tax breaks for people to build soccer stadiums. That money is money that other people either have to be paying in their taxes or that isn't available for things like supporting our small businesses. So I want to do more to focus on the small businesses. I want to deal with structural issues. For example, we need 2 years free college or technical training that allows everybody, no matter what background they come from, no matter what economic opportunity they've had, to actually get the education they need to move into one of those better professions so that they can really be prepared for the future. And I think that would help to get rid of some of the disparities that we have.
And I've always said, and I truly believe, that it really doesn't matter if you talk about stuff. The only measure of success is actually getting stuff done. And so if you look at the record and how we can move forward on this issue, I championed the Women's Economic Security Act when I was Speaker of the House. My assistant, Kate Prushek, and I went out and met with people for almost a year with women and others who had expertise in this about how we could move forward on equal pay for equal work. And for the first time in our state's history, we are providing equal pay for equal work requirements for the private sector, something no state has ever done before. It was nation leading. And also making other reforms in the workplace so that women could continue to get ahead. Delivering, I think, is an important measure for how you're going to act as the next governor. That was a very proud moment for what we did, and the process, I think, was also important. Another thing that we did, we passed the biggest expansion of union rights in a generation. And you know who benefited from that expansion? Home care workers, the workers doing the very most important job probably in our society, but who are underpaid and underrepresented. We allowed them to unionize, the very women that we're talking about here. And they're making a difference. Their pay has been going up as a result of that work. It took us 25 hours, just about 15 hours, excuse me, on the House floor to get that passed, but we made sure that we got it done. That's how we go forward. There's 2 other things I think we can do going forward. One thing is we should stop salaries based on experience, because that absolutely discriminates against women and people of color. We shouldn't allow employers to do that. And the second thing is, and I'm going to bring legislation forward this year, domestic workers, I don't know if you knew that people that clean our houses, people that care for our kids like nannies, they're not subject to the Human Rights Act. We need to make them subject to the Human Rights Act right now. So we can make progress on this, but I've done it and I want to do it more as your next governor. Thanks.
How are you planning to address funding so that the quality of a child's education is not dependent on their zip code?
You know, this is the fundamental issue I think that we're facing in this state, is how do we make sure that every child in the state of Minnesota has the education that they need to take their place in the 21st century workforce for them to be successful. And it doesn't start when they enter kindergarten. We all know that it starts further upstream. And it doesn't even just start at a K-12 or a pre-K program. It starts at birth. And quite frankly, it starts even prior to birth. We need to make sure that we're working with our children from the very earliest stages. We need to make sure that they're getting the brain development that occurs in those first 3 years of life that are so critically important to the ultimate success. And if we do that, it ultimately gets to the issue of a lot of the remedial education that we're involved in that is very expensive and very costly when the kids don't get that early stage development that is so important. But the fact of the matter is we need to continue to invest inside and outside the classroom to create an educational ecosystem that leads to success. You know, the state of Minnesota works really well if you're white and you're middle class and you're growing up in a community with good and strong schools. But there are too many of our children that are falling behind. And it's not because we don't put a lot of resources into education. 40% of the state budget is K-12. We are putting a lot of resources into it. But we need to make sure that we address the issue of unfunded mandates for our schools. We are not getting paid, and this has been an ongoing issue from many, many, many years past, where the federal government is not reimbursing our school districts for the cost of the education that they're mandatorily have to provide. So the fact of the matter is we need to continue to invest in those things. But when we create that ecosystem, in the city of St. Paul, we developed an out-of-school time network so that we extend the learning day. Extend educational opportunities in the summer to reduce summer learning loss. This is not just about resources, it's about how we approach the whole issue of education, how we support families, taking a two-generation approach. If a child doesn't know where they're going to sleep at night, if they don't have food on their table, or they're dealing with domestic violence or chemical dependency issues, these are huge challenges that we need to address to make sure our educational system is working for our kids.
Well, Chris is right on a lot of these. It's a much broader society issue. You walk down across here and all those people we thought were coming to the forum that are in there with their kids watching basketball on a Saturday. My son's playing in Owatonna today, my 5th grader, and you look in there, they share our values on this. They want the best opportunity for their children. They want the highest quality of educators in that classroom. They want that child learning to become everything that they can be. It's once again a shared Minnesota value. It's our job to make the case that why we fund this. While I agree we're trying to get at this, someone asked me, what's your radical idea? I would argue we do need to fund this. Coming from a classroom teacher and seeing this, one of the things we need to do is recruit and retain those high-quality teachers. We're losing half of them, especially in the rural areas. We lose half of them before they get to 5 years, before they get the experience. I always said the first day I went in my classroom, I knew everything. The second day, I knew nothing. I spent 20 years trying to gain that back. It's about building that infrastructure. And the question was very specific. And this is one of the things the Republicans are trying to do that we must stop. Trying to divide us on, they divide us economically, they divide us racially. Now they're dividing us geographically. And here's how it works. Kids in Cleveland, Minnesota watch bond referendums come up and fail and fail and fail. And they're asking for building improvements to fix a leaking roof. They drive by some of the suburbans and the schools and they see dome stadiums with AstroTurf in them. Our Constitution calls for a uniform, equal quality education for everyone. So we need to talk about making those investments and getting the buy-in that when we invest in Cleveland, Minnesota, so goes War Road, Minnesota. And it takes the case for us to quit trying to think some of these things are self-evident and make the case based on the data of how we save money. We know that's there. So in those wraparound services, they're going to say it costs too much to make sure that those parents have a safe place to bring their children or to stay. We need to make the case that it is too expensive not to do it. And that's the job of the governor and the coalitions that are out there. Northside Achievement Zones, things that are happening in Northfield to make sure every child, regardless of zip code, regardless of racial background, has the opportunity to succeed because then we all succeed.
When I think about the Minnesota Miracle that passed so many years ago, the foundation of that was about cooperation and that we share our resources together and make sure that communities across the state actually have access to the things that they need. And in 2013 and 14, when I was the majority leader, we retooled the school financing formula to make sure that it was equitable across the state of Minnesota. But I want to challenge the premise of this question, because I think there are things that are more important than zip code that are indicators of a child's educational outcome. Race and income level are two things that we need to pay close attention to if we want to make sure every child is getting a great education across the state of Minnesota. And that's my promise to you as the governor for the state of Minnesota after this next election. We need to invest in early learning. Absolutely, the data is crystal clear about that. Good prenatal care, home visiting by both teachers and nurses, and I love the teachers that do home visiting because they bring so much back to that classroom from the family to support those children. Let's make sure we're investing in pre-K. I've been the author of pre-K in the Minnesota House of Representatives, and I think it's an important addition to the great education that it's already happening in our strong public schools across the state of Minnesota. Let's expand the pilot of full-service community schools that think about a school as a part of a community, embracing the learning for those kids, and let's make sure the teaching workforce looks like Minnesota and its future by supporting more teachers of color in our classrooms across the school. That is how we're going to build our future, by investing in education and investing in education that supports our kids. Thank you.
So I've been talking about home visiting for quite a while, and I am a big proponent of that, and that is a really evidence-based program that really helps get kids and families off to a good start, and I think we should offer that across the state to everybody who has a child. But the question, I think, was about funding, and there's been a lot said that I absolutely agree with. Of course, this is a top issue for Minnesotans everywhere, and it of course crosses partisan boundaries too. Education has built this state. And when you go back to Wendell Anderson and the Minnesota Miracle, what that meant, what the Minnesota Miracle was saying, instead of having the schools funded from property taxes, which vary so tremendously across the state, we're going to have it state funded, or at least largely state funded, so that it's equal, so that if you're in a property poor community, you get the same quality of basic quality of schools as in a wealthy community. And we've moved away from that commitment. We need to move back to that, because whoever said it was right. It isn't just that zip code, it's people living within that community, some of whom really struggle to pay those taxes, so those property taxes, because they don't have a lot of money. And so when they're asked to do a levy referendum, they say no because they can't afford it. And we can't have our school children depending on that. We need to pay more of the funding from the state level. And then, of course, we need to focus a lot more on children who come from poverty, who come from trauma. There are a lot of needs there didn't used to be. And we need to make sure that those things are really, that we're paying attention to that, because we cannot afford to leave anybody behind in the world that we're living in. Our Constitution talks about this. I think it's a fundamental value.
Time.
So I remember when my my three kids went to Burroughs Elementary in Minneapolis, and we're a pretty well-to-do area, right? And so we were able to have fundraisers every year that raised lots and lots of money and paid for lots of additional programming within our school. But there's lots of places around the state that doesn't happen. And to me, that's what this issue comes down to. It's the assets that are in these communities. And so the broader issue here is we need to start thinking about attacking issues like education disparities by focusing on the assets that people have in their communities instead of the absence of things in communities. And if we flip our thinking in that way, I think we're going to make a lot of progress. My favorite thing to address this, and I think the thing that I've seen the most success on, is what we call promise neighborhoods, like the Northside Achievement Zone, but also things going on in Red Wing and Northfield and St. Paul. And the idea there is that every child born into that area is going to college. They start with that premise. They set high standards, high expectations. It's driven by the community, not people coming in from outside the community, although there's support coming in from outside the community. And it's helping not just the individual child, but their whole family, with help in housing, with help in getting jobs, including employing people, with help in making sure they can navigate the systems they need to. That's the model that is going to change this, by empowering, uplifting the communities that are affected. And when we do that, we really can start to transform these things. And the Northside Achievement Zone is getting amazing results. So if we're looking at the answer, I think we have one in front of us. We also, though, need to think about these geographic disparities. And one of the things that I worked on when I was speaker, we had Paul Marquardt from up near the Moorhead area was our K-12 chair. And one of the things we said is there's huge disparities between some of the larger suburban schools and the community he represents in Dilworth. And one of the things we did was we actually raised up the levy amount so that those disparities shrunk by 33%. So if you want to take action, we know what the ideas are. You just need a governor, a leader who's going to actually make them happen. And that, again, is what I'd love to offer you.
So I actually got into public service because of my concern around how we're funding our schools. And this was many years ago. I had been a licensed classroom teacher. I was a 7th grade teacher in the Mounds View schools, and I taught science. And so later on, when I was home with my son, I ended up being asked by the superintendent to serve on a finance committee, and then I ended up chairing an operating levy referendum. What's really important to understand, it's not just greater Minnesota that struggles. Any area that's property poor, which is my area where you don't have that business tax base, it's difficult to get the voters to increase their taxes just to keep teachers in the classroom. And when my son was on drumline, it was fascinating for me. I was a roadie, and they competed all over the state, and there were some extraordinarily beautiful schools in greater Minnesota, which I'm pleased that they were able to get those bond referendums through. But that's not the case everywhere, even in the metro. And so there is an uneven playing field right now, and there is not equity in the system. I want to touch on one thing as well that I learned during my listening tour. Actually, it was in Eagan. There were some parents that shared with me their frustration with a policy that has unintended consequences, and that is when we're scoring our schools. Let's say you score a school and you say, okay, well, you're not an A, you're a C minus. Families that can leave do. Not all of them, but some of them. And what we've tended to do is then we further concentrate poverty in our schools, and that is not a good approach. When I taught 7th grade, we had 2/3 of our kids were middle income to upper, 1/3 transit lower income. And studies show, and the evidence shows, that those kids are going to have a little bit of a harder time. They're more at risk. And so we need to change policies around rating schools, making sure we're focusing on our children and helping them achieve. But also, this is one of the biggest things we fund as a state. So we have to make sure that we truly have equity, and I don't believe it's on the property tax.
Now, Tim, you're going to be the first person to answer the next question. We're going to switch from children to seniors.
Thing we can do is make sure our seniors are protected, especially through Medicare and Medicaid, that they have the opportunity, and we see the assault federally, and we know we're going to have question on this coming back of where the state is going to have to build out from what we're going to do, because it's not going to come from D.C., of making sure that people have that accessibility, making sure we do the things that are necessary to protect their Social Security, make sure we protect the defined benefit pension plans that are there that allow people, first of all, the economic opportunity to be able to stay in their home, and then the health opportunity to be there. But it is more than that, and this is something they're doing down in Rochester that we've been over on about the last 10 years, focusing on the livability, the walkability of our communities, focusing on Rochester understanding a dementia-friendly community. And it's how you do things like curb bump outs, how you do things like the crossings, how you do things of coordinate how people shop, and how we make sure services are closer to where our seniors live. Those are all things because people want to live as close to home as they can. When it comes to assisted living and senior living, this is one of the challenges we have in how we fund that long-term care and where it's accessible, because what ends up happening, especially in greater Minnesota, becomes very difficult to recruit and retain people to be able to keep those long-term care facilities open. So what ends up happening is people end up not only moving from their home, they end up moving from their community, where they lose that connection to where their family is. And the state has done, and the legislators are up here, took some bold steps and moved some of those equity funding to make sure that that happens. But I think it's that broader issue of viewing how we see healthy communities, how we see life cycles in communities of where people live and how they live. And it does come down to things like transportation and visionary transportation. When we talk transit, by the way, we're talking rural transit, busing routes out in Medelia and New Ulm. Our job is to make the case we can't allow Republicans to pit transit against highways because it affects all of our lives. That's how we start to get the funding necessary to make that happen, to make those healthy, livable communities.
The student nurse, I remember a clinical rotation where I took care of a woman named Margaret who was nearing the end of her life. And she was living at home and independently as her health was failing, and my job was to help her figure that out. And she was capable of most everything, but she had a hard time eating because she didn't have any appetite, and that was impacting her health. And so I learned in a very, very personal way the ways to intervene and help and support somebody, especially because she didn't have a lot of family around. I think about Minnesota and this great big tall state and the fact that we have more people aging across the state of Minnesota, especially in greater Minnesota, and sometimes living in small communities, in sparsely populated communities. And if we share the value that we're going to support our elders, our seniors, the people who have built this state of Minnesota, then we've got a real challenge in front of us because we're not quite ready. I think we should focus on paid family leave. When I took care of my mom at the end of her life, the nurses said, go take care of her. And it gave me the flexibility and ability to take care of my kids and to get back home and take care of my mom. Paid family leave will allow family members to do that for their loved ones across the state of Minnesota and keep their jobs and continue to earn and support themselves. That's important. Let's think about the tools that support people in their homes before they have to make a decision to go into assisted living or a nursing home. Community health workers, public health nursing, parish nursing, and congregate meals, places where people can come together and engage with one another. Mental acuity is improved when you continue social interaction, and when people are living in a small community and isolated, it impacts their health and well-being, and then we see decline and into a nursing home. So I think there are things that we can do as volunteers. We can do things to make sure that we have the workforce necessary to care for people, but let's make the commitment that people who are aging across the state will have our support so they can live independently as long as possible.
They say that the best long-term care policy, healthcare policy, is a daughter who loves you and lives close by. And I have a daughter who loves me. Unfortunately, she doesn't live close by. But I've been working on this issue in the legislature for quite a while. Actually, Minnesota does relatively well at keeping seniors in their homes and out of nursing homes. But the problem, we have many problems though. And one of the big problems we have is that we don't have the workforce. We have tremendous workforce shortages for people to do home care and just give seniors that little bit of help that they need to be able to stay in their homes. So anybody who says, let's not accept immigrants into our state, let's, tighten down on, our workforce of the future, and even now, a lot of the immigrants, a lot of the people who are new to our country or young people, even high school students, those are the kind of jobs that, they're going to fill initially. And so we need everybody in our workforce. It's a good starting job. And for some people, it's a good long-term job. But we need to make sure that the wages are there so that the people who love that work can actually do it and raise their families. And this is something the state's really been lagging on. A lot of this care is paid for by the state through Medicaid. And some of it is paid for in other ways. We've got to make sure that people who do this really important work can actually make a living at it. There are many other things. The transportation issues are huge for people, and many of us don't drive, and we also have people with disabilities, not only elderly people, who want to live in the community and can't drive or don't want to drive. So we need to give communities the tools to make different kinds of transportation available. Many of them want to do this. They understand their communities. They know how to get it to work best, but we need to give them the resources and help them with expertise if they need that.
The first thing I think we have to remember about this issue is that 95% of the care for seniors and people with disabilities, but seniors in particular, are done by informal caregivers. It's not part of our public system. These are the sisters and daughters mainly, and wives who are taking care of their husbands and fathers and partners. And we need to do a much better job of supporting those folks. That's absolutely the place that we start. And I have some legislation that I've worked on, and we made some progress, called the Caregiver Security Act. And what's that about is recognizing the obstacles that these caregivers have to either starting or continuing their caregiving. Paid family leave is a piece of it. That's important. But it's also providing tax credits for folks, because you actually lose a lot of income when you have to take care of your mom or your dad or what have you. So tax credits that can fill in the back of that. Respite care, so you can get a break from the caregiving. I know my mom took care of my dad for 3 years before he died at home. And it was arduous work. It was hard work, and my sister and I helped, but it was a big burden. And so getting that respite care so that they can renew their energy actually extends their ability to provide this informal care for about 1.5 years, which saves all of us as taxpayers unbelievable amounts of money. And we need to get money into technology and other kinds of things to allow people to change their homes so that they can stay there. So if we do this, I think we actually can solve a big part of the problem, but we need to support the caregivers as well as the care. We also need to support, as Tina mentioned, the people actually providing the care. We need to raise their wages, not only because this is such important work that we need to attract really good people and honor that work, but we want them to be able to save enough money so they can take care of themselves when they retire, right? Part of the problem with our retirement right now is people don't make enough money to put it into savings. So we need to raise their wages and everybody's wages. And the other thing that I just want to say, and it may not be a question, but this issue of elder abuse that we have seen coming out is an outrage in this state, and I'm ashamed, quite frankly, of our Department of Health and where we are right now, and that we have to stop that and put more resources into making sure people actually in assisted living and nursing facilities get the care and protection that they need.
I've served on the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency board now for almost 12 years, and we issue tax-exempt bonds and other bonds to work with our local government officials. A lot of development happens at the local level, and the reason why I'm talking about that is that we know we don't have enough housing, affordable housing for our senior population, and we have quite a big group moving through. So understanding what that means, there's actually a plan in place in the state of Minnesota to work to help some of our seniors age in place for the next 20 years as we build up that housing stock in partnership with our local government officials who drive the development. They have to decide they want it and need it, and then they have to bring forward local resources. They work with private developers, nonprofits, MHFA. There's federal funds that flow through us as well. It's a big partnership, and it's not easy to happen. We know there's a huge shortage. So Minnesota, with their plan to help people age in place, part of it is understanding the condition of some of the houses of the folks we're going to try to keep in their homes. A lot of them need new roofs. They need roof upgrades. They need furnace upgrades. They need window upgrades. And so there's actually some funds to begin to assist some of our senior Minnesotans in staying in their home. Public transportation is a huge piece. Now, millennials don't necessarily want to drive either, and we're not all going to be driving until we're 90, right? Yeah. So public transportation is a really important piece to all of this. Now, with my mother-in-law, we located her in the city of White Bear Lake, and she can walk to the post office. You know, there's all these little facilities, the doctor's office, post office right next to her. But it's getting harder for her to walk. And so I've, on that board, have been advocating for long-term planning to make sure we're planning for this huge population. And it's statewide, so there are resources that go statewide. But we've heard from mayors around the state there's a great need, and we don't have enough resources right now. Governor Dayton has $115 million in the bonding bill, which is critical for affordable housing in the state of Minnesota, and hoping that he can be successful in getting this through.
You know, Heward Humphrey famously once said that the moral test of a society is how we treat those at the dawn of life, our children, those in the twilight of life, our seniors, and those on the shadows of life, those with disabilities and in poverty. And the fact of the matter is, this truly is a moral test of our society. Who do we want to be as a state? And how we treat our seniors and how we support our seniors is really going to be a fundamental question that we have to ask ourselves. And the Republicans are always going to come and say, well, that sounds great, but we don't have the resources to do that. And I don't buy that. I don't buy that we don't have the resources to do what is right by our seniors in the richest country in the world, with all the wealth that we've seen, with the tax breaks that are going to millionaires and billionaires and corporations. If we get the richest Minnesotans to pay their fair share, we'll help find those resources to be able to address some of these issues, like transportation systems. Transportation systems are going to take a lot of different shapes and forms depending upon which community you're in. But if a person can live in their home, even if they're not driving, and have transportation to a store, have transportation to church, have transportation to a doctor, that will extend their ability to stay at home, and that's the most cost-effective care that we can possibly have, the cheapest option that we have. Rebecca mentioned mayors across the state of Minnesota that are trying to find resources to build senior affordable housing. I am one of those mayors, and I've been working for 12 years to make sure that we expanded the stock of a senior affordable housing in the city of St. Paul, but those are complex deals. And the state has to be a participant, and we have to have a strike force that can go across the state of Minnesota to help communities build that senior housing. Some of the other ideas, the block nurse program, where we can have someone go into a home and make sure that seniors are taking care of themselves. Expand that, get that into every community. That's a huge piece of it. And at the end of the day, I think technology is going to help us. When we get to fully automated self-driving vehicles, that alone, you think about some of those technologies that we can't even imagine, but are coming very, very quickly. I think it will help us in the long run for seniors to be able to stay in their homes.
What form of health care system do you favor? How do you propose we get there?
I am a supporter of a single-payer healthcare system, and I would like us to make some progress on that when I'm the next governor of the state of Minnesota. My first job for the Minnesota Nurses Association was as an organizer in support of Minnesota Care. 25 years ago, this state said, if you work for a living but don't have access to health care, you should. And we led the nation by putting Minnesota Care in place. And I'll tell you, that's the thing that hooked me on Minnesota's politics, because we took a big idea and we made it happen. It took a little time. I was there for the last 2 years, but we made it happen. It's tested, it's trusted, it is statewide, and I would like to use that as the vehicle for us to move forward. Let's let anybody in Minnesota buy into Minnesota Care. Let's let anybody buy in. And now let's do the hard work of building the infrastructure so we can contract directly with providers and move the health plans out of the middle of that equation. They are using their tools of denying care to pad their bottom line at the expense of people who are sick. And that's not good enough for me as a nurse. That's not going to be good enough for me as your governor. I know that we have the capacity to do this because I've seen us already head down this pathway. When the health plans are not denying care and the providers are working with people, we get better outcomes and people get better care. It will help us with the consolidation that we see happening in the southeastern part of the state because we can contract with the providers and the systems and make sure care is distributed. It will help us with drug costs because we can finally get around the federal government's prohibition right now on negotiating with drug companies to get better prices. We should invest more in primary care because we know that that is going to yield a better outcome for people. It always does, and the data is crystal clear about that. And we're going to continue to work on workforce and the delivery of mental health care across the state of Minnesota. Mental health care, the care of people with disabilities, and the care for people with chemical dependency issues. Those don't fit neatly into the box of an insurance company, but we can, when we stand together and contract directly with providers, assure that people are getting the care that they need. I can't wait to do that with you.
I've supported single-payer health care for many years. And one of the things I've done in the legislature is exactly what Erin's just was mentioning. In our public health care programs, we have a pool of public money, and then we actually hire insurance companies. We pay them a rate per patient, and then we turn over to them the whole job of buying and managing health care for people. This is very similar to what a candidate on this stage wants to do for all of us, and we're already doing it in our public programs, and it's a failure. And I've been working to try to get rid of that, to get the insurance companies out of our public programs. So I think we need to move to a single-payer system. Insurance companies have no place. They're not adding value to us in health care. Health care is too important. We all need it. We're all going to need it today or tomorrow. We should be in one pool, not in different pools of insurance. And also, I support the Minnesota Health Plan, which is Senator John Marty's plan that he's been going around talking with people about. But I think there's a way to get there, to start getting there. Either letting people buy into the Minnesota Care program, I certainly support that. I also think we need to build trust among Minnesotans that we can do this. And so one idea I have is to start with a single-payer dental plan, to start so that everybody in the state would pay a little bit on their taxes but have dental care that would be prepaid, available, or something like this. We need to bring the experts together to really decide what's possible given how much money we have coming from the federal government, all the rules. This is not a simple thing that you can just say, here's my plan, I'm going to get into office and make it happen. But I'm somebody who understands this stuff and really has a long-term commitment to getting us to a single-payer system without insurance companies between people and their doctors.
Well, the importance of this issue came clear to me not too long ago. I was speaking with a friend of mine, a guy I've known through politics, and he has had a 26-year-old son who has diabetes. And the son was on his parents' program, insurance under the ACA until he turned 26. But when he turned 26, he was working in a restaurant, didn't offer health insurance, and he couldn't figure out a way to pay for it. He stopped, taking the insulin the way he needed to, and he died. That's the stakes in this discussion about what we do with health care. It's not a theoretical discussion about who ought to pay, and all the paperwork and that, although that's important. This is a life or death issue for people across the state of Minnesota, and we need to approach it that way. Now, I support a single-payer system. I think it makes the most sense. It's consistent with our Minnesota values that I was taught growing up. I'm healthy today, but there's some sick people out there right now. I'm willing to pay a little bit more to care for them because I know someday someone will have my back when I get sick. And if we start this discussion from that values proposition, we're going to get to the right place. So we need to do that. And as we phase it in, I think what we ought to be thinking about is 50 to 65-year-olds being in a state-only Medicare program that looks like Medicare and covering kids. And then we can kind of close the gap between those and have the healthiest people, moving forward. But we need to expand pools. But that's where the real challenges are right now. But we can't just start with who's paying for it, right? We need to also talk about delivery systems and making sure we're cooperating with mental health experts and social service experts and others to keep people healthy. We need to vastly expand and improve upon our really impressive public health programs right here to reduce obesity, to reduce smoking, those things that drive up healthcare costs. And we should start a moon mission here in the state of Minnesota. No other state can be in this position to solve diabetes or to solve Alzheimer's, because if we do that, we transform people's lives, we improve our economy, and we drive down healthcare costs for everybody. So this has to be a comprehensive approach, but at the end of the day, let's remember what it's about. It's actually keeping people alive.
So as Paul says, lives depend on us doing something, and we've been doing piecemeal things for a really long time, and I contend it's time to do something really, really different. I say we're at a watershed moment where people are tired of fear of losing health care security, fear of their child not having health care, fear of going to, into bankruptcy. So after listening to Minnesotans around the state, including a third-generation businessman who was a Republican who came and said, we must get to a single-payer health care system, because the ACA didn't work well for sole proprietors and small business folks, farmers. And so I had a team of researchers, policy experts, and an economist research all the countries that have gotten this done. How are they doing it? How are they paying for it? And how are they keeping people healthy and reducing costs? And then I had them research states in the United States that attempted to do this and failed, and why they failed. And then they looked at the systems in Minnesota, and we've developed a plan that has an innovative payment system that will make sure that if you're a Minnesotan, you're going to receive a standard set of benefits, period. It doesn't matter what your employment status is, if you have pre-existing conditions, or your age. And we'd have to get waivers from the federal government, but there's going to be a single protected fund at the state level. We will have a health board. And that standard set of benefits must include mental health care services and substance treatment services, because that's the fundamental basics to health. We are going to take the private systems that are in place, the private providers, and they're going to be a part of this. They no longer have to do coding and billing, because we're moving away from a fee-for-service. We're going to go to a more innovative process, which is quarterly upfront reimbursements per enrollee. You get to choose who you're going to work with to provide your health. It's going to be coordinated care. They will be incented and rewarded for keeping you healthy, and they don't have to go through pre-authorizations anymore, because insurance is done in my system. So Healthy Minnesota Plan on my website, RebeccaOtto.com. Take a peek. It's time.
Done.
I think the Affordable Care Act could have provided the roadmap for the going forward for health insurance across the United States of America. Unfortunately, the Republicans came in, they started playing politics with it, and they continually eroded. It was what Mitt Romney did in Massachusetts, and it was working. And we know that they needed some adjustments. And so I really believe in the, watching the politicization of what happened out there, that we're going to have to get to a single-payer system. And I applaud Tina Liebling for her championing that program for many, many years. John Marty's been a champion of that. This has become personal for me. I was done being mayor on January 2nd, it was nice to not get the emails constantly all day long. The problem is I don't have health insurance now. And so Connie and I had to go out to the market to figure out what we could do. We were offered two choices. We could either pay $2,400 a month to extend the benefits that I had at the city, or we could have a $1,600 a month plan with a $6,000 deductible. So right now we're paying $16,000 a month and praying that we don't get sick. That's not health insurance. That's a failed system. And if we can figure out how to deal with it as a middle-class family, we'll make it work. But there are families out there that don't have that option and don't have the ability to reach in and get $1,600 a month out of their pocket, or to pay $6,000 in a deductible. So they're not getting care. And what happens when they don't get care, then a small illness becomes catastrophic because they didn't go to the doctor in the first place when they could have gotten treated for that. So the fact of the matter is we need to change this, and we need to adopt a single-payer system. We need to build towards it. It's not a light switch that we can just turn on, but we need to start taking the direct steps to get there as soon as we can.
This is the fundamental issue for all of us. This one knows no politics. Everybody needs health care. Everybody has a story about this. The question was, what do I envision as a health care system? One, that everyone has access to. Two, one that everybody can afford to pay on. And three, one where they can access it near their home because the providers are there. And probably four, most importantly, one that they don't have to use very often because we're focusing on the preventive side of things. Paul Thissen was exactly right. That's the piece. We have spent the last 8 years and the better part of the last 30 years debating insurance reform, not true wellness reform, not true health care, not true access. With that being said, I ran in 2006 because I watched my father die when my little brother was 8 and I was young. I watched the bills pile up and my mother put off retirement for 15 years going back to work because of that. Those stories are legion out there, and it is what it's about. It's not theoretical. So when the opportunity to improve and add millions of people in the ACA came up, I voted for it. And I voted 70 times to protect it. And again, Chris is right. They undermined where we were going. We knew it was the start. We knew we had to try and get there to improve the system. So as governor of Minnesota, again, Erin's right on this. Let's triage this. Let's get the folks that are paying $16,000 a year, get them on Minnesota Care, start to expand that. Let's start putting those resources into, we do have the Silicon Valley of this. We have institutions here that we can start solving these things. You want to solve the national debt? Cures Alzheimer's. It's $1 trillion a year, and it improves lives. Those are the things Minnesota can lead on. But I ask us all, certainly I think we probably end up with a single payer, but I'd ask you to open up your sights a little bigger. I represent and work with a fabulous healthcare system, and it's one where it's a zero-sum proposition. If we fail, then it is unacceptable. But the VA system's a zero-payer system. And when you ask veterans at the VFW, 94% of them agree with doing that. We need to think better about this, but be clear about this. California and Vermont have Democratic governors and supermajorities in both their houses, and they couldn't move directly to single payer. So I think what we need to do is focus on the broader issue, build the coalition to make it inevitable, and then do it the Minnesota way, a Minnesota health care plan.
I want to thank all of you. These answers that you've been giving have had wonderful substance. So let's just give them all a round of applause. You can go ahead and take a break. Restrooms are around the corner. Are you all ready? We're good to go. The first question, now these are 1 minute rapid response in a sense. Tina Liebling will be the first person to be asked this question. Vocational schools at the high school and post-secondary levels need to adapt to technological advances, yet work with limited resources. How can the state better support vocational education to realistically prepare students for good careers?
Vocational education. Well, I think there is a couple of components to this. One is that students just can't get the education they need a lot of times. I think we talked about this before. I think we need to provide the first 2 years of college or technical training without charging tuition. Other states are doing this. It is not a radical idea. We can afford to do it. So that would be number one. In order to be sure that students are getting the skills that they need for the actual jobs that are out there, there has to be partnership between employers and our public colleges. That's actually happening, but I think employers need to continue to step up. They need to also step up with their own training programs, and we need to have more apprenticeship programs. So, I mean, it's not a simple answer. One thing I just want to say quickly, though, I think that education for its own sake is still very important. We need an educated populace. It's not only about getting a job.
Well, I think Faribault provides a really great model for this. In that community, they have a pretty big manufacturing base. And one of the things that they do is they actually have the manufacturers come into the high schools and have the high school kids go and visit these manufacturing facilities. And what that does is it exposes kids to this kind of work that they otherwise typically wouldn't be exposed to in the day and age we live in. And they learn that it's not all kind of dirty and tough work. It can be tough, but a lot of it's so high tech. And people's eyes, I've gone and seen this, and the kids' eyes just open up. And so we need to do that. The other thing that they've done is they've used their high school and their community college and their local manufacturers to come together to provide very specific training programs so that they're sharing equipment, they're sharing technology, they're sharing learning across all three of those sectors. And when we can cooperate and do that kind of thing, I think we can make great progress on this. So I think what we should do is lift up that kind of model all across the state. And what the role of the governor can do is to make sure that we're funding our education system in a way that allows communities to take that idea and build on it.
I have a plan for 2 years tuition free in our Minnesota state system. One of the things we need to do, they've asked for a one-time appropriation in the Minnesota state system to upgrade buildings, facilities, make sure they have the faculty they need. And so I actually want to get that to them because they're an extraordinarily important resource. I was just talking to a gentleman the other day, and it may get along the lines of what Paul's talking about, but he said in Germany, the colleges and training centers, vocational, they're actually partnering with some of the big businesses that have highly expensive equipment, and they're partnering with the schools so that the schools don't have to buy this equipment because it's frankly not possible. So working creatively to make sure that you're training our fellow Minnesotans for the 21st century jobs. My son happens to love working with his hands, and he went to Hamlin and he works in the theaters, and Hamlin had a great facility for him to work with. But the vocational training, there is a lot of opportunity, and there are kids that want to work with their hands. Ooh.
We have just started to see the reinstitution of vocational training in some of our high schools in St. Paul. At Humboldt High School, the principal has brought in a program, and it's an incredible thing to have kids actually be exposed to careers and not just being told that they have to go to four-year programs. I'm a huge believer in a liberal arts education. I think kids should be trained in history and literature and civics, but not every child needs to go to the University of Minnesota and become a Russian literature major. The fact of the matter is there are great careers working with our building trade unions who would come into the schools, who would expand their apprenticeship programs. Our kids can come out of those programs earning not minimum wage, not $15 an hour, but $25, $30 and more with good benefits and a good retirement plan. Vocational education is an important component. Because we've reduced resources to schools, a lot of those programs have been taken out of the schools. I feel the same way about music programs in schools. We need to continue to expand those opportunities so kids are exposed to as many paths as possible.
This starts at home, and I think it starts with leadership, showing the nobleness of trade, the nobleness of work, this understanding that these are things that we need to have done. These are pathways that are enhancing. And as you heard people talk about, we're doing this. We're not theoretically doing it. In Fairmont, Superintendent Brown partnered with AGCO and McNeely Steel. We build dump trucks and tractors in southern Minnesota. We're building these things. We're manufacturing at a big level. They need the workforce to be there, so they took the welding academy, put it in the school. This year, 5 of their graduates left with that, starting out at $56,500 a year with full benefits, no student loan debt, doing something that's noble to them, something that provides them what they need and provides to that local economy. Those are things that we can incentivize. And the thing I would say is, you hear about apprenticeships. One of the things I did as the ranking member of the VA committee, make it possible to use your VA benefits to go into the trades and use those for those apprenticeship programs to move people in. It's a smart investment. It gets us our workforce, and it allows people to do what their passion is.
I went to college and I loved it, and it was transformative for me, but it's not for everybody, and it's not the only path to a good job that supports your family. And when we think about higher education, a big part of that is to make sure you come out with a job that supports you and your family so you can live the life of your choosing. This question is important. Joe Brown, who's doing some VOTAC down in the southern part of the state, tells us that the work that he's doing outside of that high school is not incented. There's no payment for it, so they're actually penalized for doing it. We have to make sure that we're paying for trades in the schools. In Alexandria, Minnesota, they have embedded trades in their school again. So welding, and they have agriculture, and they have culinary arts. And in that school, they have decided for their students to be prepared to take the next step. They need exposure in their high school so they can understand if they want to go into healthcare or business or into the trades. Let's make sure our schools are exposing our students to the opportunities in front of them so they're ready to go.
Paul, you're going to be the first to answer this question. Testing currently plays a huge role in measuring educational progress and success. Would you change the current system of testing? If yes, how?
Yes, and I think we should go to 3 tests, 1 in elementary school, 1 in middle school, and 1 in high school. That should be sufficient for us, and we should tie them actually to career and college readiness much more than we do today. The bottom line is I remember my son Griffin when he took his tests all through elementary school, twice a year, and you'd get these reports back as parents, and one quarter he'd be here, and the next there, all over the place. Gave me no information whatsoever. We need to get our learning back to actually teaching kids what they need to know to succeed in life as opposed to teaching to the test. So we can get by with 3 tests through the K-12 system, 1 in elementary school, 1 in middle school, and 1 in high school.
So having been a teacher in the classroom, having been a mom of a son who went through the Forest Lake schools, there's a lot of testing. And teachers know that it disrupts your learning and it puts pressure on the kids. And as parents, we got notes home saying, make sure your child gets to bed and they get a good meal and you don't stress them. I mean, it's intense for everybody. And then if you have test anxiety, it all goes out the window. What I liked with my son is they had a test that measured him individually. These were student-based tests where he was in the beginning of the year, where he was later in the year, and it allowed the teachers to know exactly where he was in reading and in math. So it was really to help him with personal growth, and I'd prefer tests like that rather than system tests, because I think there's problems with system tests. And you know, some of our children have IEPs. This is not an IEP, but it's really more about understanding where children sit.
I just asked Tim, I said, are those tests still called the Iowa whatever? He said, yeah. I said, I don't trust anything with the name Iowa in it, so let's eliminate all testing. Look, this is where we have to have respect for teachers and respect for principals and respect for what happens in a building, and let them make some determination as to whether or not they are measuring the progress of their children through whatever methodology that they're using in their classroom. It doesn't mean that we can't ever test. I think Paul's idea of limiting it to 3 tests during the course of an elementary education and a high school education, that could be workable. But the fact of the matter is we're imposing all of these things that I think sometimes are there for the benefit of the corporations that are producing the tests, and not really focused in on whether or not the children are actually being measured appropriately. So I think that reducing the number of tests, empowering our teachers to make their own determinants of how their children are doing, and principals to make sure that their teachers are doing what they need to do, that is treating our teachers like professionals.
Time.
As a teacher of several decades, we test to inform instruction. We test to have instantaneous feedback to see what students aren't getting and what we need to do differently, whether it's on our delivery method or differentiated education in that classroom. So testing has always been a piece of this if it was focused on how do we improve the learning outcomes that were going to be there. We do need to know where there's gaps. We need to see where they're at. Chris is right about this, though. There's no doubt about it. This is for-profit corporations testing. Not only that, they're selling student data. As governor, that stops. It's ridiculous we would go down that road. The real question we need to ask is, how much money are we spending on that? How much stress and extra paperwork is that putting on? How much is the testing? I go out and talk to them. This is my wife. This is my friends. That these are the things that lead to burnout in education. These are the things that lack creativity. These are the things that don't allow the growth in those schools of allowing really creative things that sparked our imagination to make us go on and achieve the things we need to do. So no, we are always going to need to assess that, but not standardized testing to put a failing mark or something on a school. That's not helping us get any better.
I was in Fergus Falls about a week ago and met with a group of educators there, and they told me that they lose nearly 2 months of instructional time to standardized testing in their schools. And that's robbing the students in that community and in communities across the state of Minnesota of the opportunity to learn. The testing that we're doing now is about political accountability. It is not about our kids learning. And I would like to see us do fewer tests and rely more on the assessments and the evaluations that educators do. They're in that classroom every day and they know their students, and those evaluations will show us the progress that our students are making and give us the full instructional year for education and instruction. I believe we need to do that for our kids' education and for our own economic future.
So George Bush famously said, "Is our children learning?" You know, testing should be to aid education, to help teachers understand where children are and what they need, and to help parents understand where their children are and what they need. It should not be about, corporations needing to sell tests. We certainly have, there are pendulums that seem to go back and forth in education, and testing is one of those. And the whole thing in No Child Left Behind, where the purpose of testing seemed to be to punish schools and take away their resources, that absolutely should not happen. We have limited time with children in schools, and teachers need to have that time to actually teach them. Although I wouldn't get rid of all tests. I mean, sometimes tests are a learning tool, too. I mean, sometimes you take a test and then you know more than you did before you took the test. But I would look to the teachers. They are the experts in how to educate students.
Perfect. Since we know the rural areas of Minnesota are trending more Republican, what is your strategy to win those areas?
Well, the strategy is to understand your neighbors care about many of the same things that you care about. As I said, I'm the second Democrat in 125 years. The other one left the party. But I ran on a message that would improve people's lives. I ran on a message that we're in this together. I went out and tried to understand where they were coming from to try and solve those issues. And then I built a campaign that could take that message everywhere. We have a special election coming up in Tony Cornish's district. 5 out of 6 times I've won that district by as much as 61 points. Not because we weren't taking that we weren't right on the issues. We're always right on the issues. But we have to take the issues out to the people, make the case, and my goal is, and this is why we can win this race, we take a positive message of health care, of education, of transportation to our neighbors, we build a campaign that can bring people in, and then we do the things that are going to ensure that it continues. We show them that it works. So we can do this. It's imperative for the state of Minnesota. So many things aren't being done because we're allowing this urban-rural divide to split us off. It's not a real thing if we don't allow it to be. As your governor, we can heal that.
I think serving in the House of Representatives has been exceptionally instructional. And if you have been in one district in Minnesota, you've been in one district in Minnesota. And I have been in the districts all across the state of Minnesota. Minnesota is a beautiful mosaic. It is not a monolith. Different communities need different things, and showing up, spending time, getting to know people, building relationships, and showing that you will fight for them, that is the solution. Let's remember that Amy Klobuchar has won statewide year after year, and she's going to be at the top of our ticket. That's really good news for us. That's really good news for us. But if we want to win across the state of Minnesota, you can't just focus on the suburbs and the metro and Duluth. You got to campaign across the state of Minnesota, which is why I started as early as I did to connect with people across the state of Minnesota and show them that you give a damn, and I do. 11 years with the people of Minnesota. I am devoted to them and to our future, and that's why I'm earning support all over the state.
So my formula for flipping, I'm often asked, how did I flip a red district to blue, and how did I do it as a bold progressive, and how have I gotten elected time after time? I believe that the formula is this. We have to be who we say we are, and we have to let people know that we care about them. And I agree that every district is different, but also people within the districts are not all the same. And we can't act like people in rural Minnesota are all okay with letting farmers pollute the water, for example. People in the small towns need to drink that water, and they may not be too happy with what the farmers are dumping on the fields. Everybody needs economic development. People are really struggling with low wages in rural Minnesota too. We don't speak to those people. Often we speak to the corporate interests instead of to the people who live in the communities. I think that's how we win all over the state, because people all across the state really need the same basic things.
Well, it's about showing up. It's about showing them that they have power and changing the way our state government works so that it's not the state government forcing people to do things that are down to the very last detail, but letting local communities figure out the best path for them to meet the standards that we all agree we need to meet. I think that that's critically important. It's appealing to patriotism. You know, I had a woman say, I support single payer because I'm a patriot, and I believe all of my co-citizens should have the same access to health care that I do. We should engage in faith. Faith communities share our values in so many ways, and we've given that away. But it's also important that we don't run to win in greater Minnesota by leaving other communities behind. We shouldn't leave victims of gun violence behind in order to win in greater Minnesota. We shouldn't leave refugees and people seeking asylum in this country behind in order to win in greater Minnesota. And one of the candidates on that stage has run and won campaigns in rural Minnesota by doing just that. I think that is the wrong direction for us to go, and we need to change. And if we win that way, in some ways it's not worth winning.
If I'm lucky enough to be the governor of the state of Minnesota, I will be an evidence-based governor, and I have the evidence to show that I have run and won statewide 3 times. I am the first woman DFLer to ever win state auditor. I'm the only Democrat to ever get reelected to the office of state auditor. And when I ran, I knocked out an incumbent by the largest margin in 112 years. It was an Anderson, I'm an Otto, and yes, it can be done. And also, when Governor Pawlenty ran, the first time I won by that large margin, we did not win the governor's seat. I'm not a coattail race. I won more rural counties than Pawlenty. And when Governor Dayton has run both times, I win more rural counties than Governor Dayton. It's because I work with these local officials around the state. I know the fire chiefs, the volunteer firefighters, the town supervisors. I've been working with them. They know me. They respect me. And my margin of victory exceeded Dayton's in 2014 by 6 points. I exceeded Congressman Nolan's on the Iron Range by double digits. And I've been an executive at the state level. And when I had a primary opponent and was outspent 4-1, I beat him 4-1.
There are some fundamental issues that divide us. There are voters out there that are not going to vote for me because I stand for common sense gun laws. There are voters out there that are not going to vote for me because I stand for reproductive freedom for women. There are voters out there that are not going to vote for me because I stand on behalf of our immigrant community, because I understand that Minnesota has always been based on immigrants coming to this state and to this nation. But the fact of the matter is we win when we look voters in the eye, we tell them what we stand for, we tell them what we're going to fight for, and then we go out and do it. And we win when we go to the cities across the state of Minnesota, not just Minneapolis or St. Paul, not just Duluth, but to Red Wing and to Winona and to Moorhead and to cities all across the state of Minnesota and say, if you care about the future of your education for your children, if you care about the business climate for small businesses on Main Street, if you care about transportation, about health care for your seniors, those are the issues that Democrats run and win on. We win when we fight for our progressive values, not because we're Republican light, but because we stand, we tell people what we believe in, and then we go out and accomplish that.
Okay, the next question, Erin Murphy will answer first. How do we ensure election integrity and stop voter suppression efforts of the Republicans?
I want to start by saying that I think Steve Simon is doing a fantastic job here in the state of Minnesota. And there isn't evidence of voter suppression or voter fraud here in the state of Minnesota. Minnesota does a great job. We've got good voter turnout. Unfortunately, every one of the Republicans running for this office is for voter ID, and that is voter suppression. The tools of our democracy across this country are under attack, and that includes access to the ballot box. And we can't forego those tools. Those are ours. Those are our tools to build our bright future. And if we want to take on the toughest issues that we face, whether it's gun violence prevention or racial disparities, we have to make sure that Minnesotans have access to that ballot box so that they can elect the people who they believe with them will build a future for us. We must protect the integrity of the vote here in the state of Minnesota, and you know damned well I will do that with you.
The question really, I think, was how do we ensure election integrity and stop voter suppression efforts of the Republicans? The answer to the second part is we can't stop them from trying. They're going to keep trying because they believe that they should be able to choose their voters instead of their voters choosing them. So one of the things we need to do, I think, is move toward having a redistricting commission, a nonpartisan redistricting commission, so that we remove the chance that they might be able to gerrymander Minnesota the way that has happened in so many states. That is a very real danger. I also agree that Steve Simon's done an excellent job. We need to always be wary that very different things that are proposed are going to actually reduce the vote. I think we should allow felons to vote after they get out of prison. That's a very important thing. We should be restoring the vote, always pushing for more people to vote, not fewer.
Well, this is a fundamental part of the war that we're fighting and engaged in right now, the same war that has led us to electing Donald Trump in a Republican Congress that value tax cuts over children's health care. And this is where the battleground really is. I agree with Tina, we need a redistricting commission. We should restore felon voting. We should have automatic registration when you turn 18. We should restore civics education back into our schools so people actually learn the importance and how government operates. But we have to do more than that. I was at the mall, the Nicollet Mall last night with my wife looking at Super Bowl experience thing. But as I was walking down, I was looking at all these people that were walking down there. And I do the same thing when I'm in the supermarket. How are we actually talking to these people as Democrats? Do we have a message that's actually going to resonate with the average ordinary person standing, doing their job, doing their work? And I don't think we've done a good enough job of that. What this campaign needs to be about is being bold and making sure that people understand that we're on their side and we have real solutions for them. And we have people that are actually not just going to talk about it, but deliver.
Time.
Credibility in delivering for
Time.
government makes a difference.
So as governor, I would veto any policy that attempts to suppress the vote because that is anti-American, it is unpatriotic, because part of being a citizen in our country is that you get to vote. And restoring the rights of felons who have served their time, they've shown recidivism rates decrease when you allow them to partake in society in a meaningful way. So it is essential. I talked to a gentleman who was a little bit older who told me way back in the day, everybody got to vote. If you came here and worked, everybody got to vote. And so, but we know why there's attempts to suppress votes. Another really important thing for our system, we must maintain trust in our system. And so keeping a paper ballot for redundancy and for audit is essential, and we can never allow that to go away. You want a paper ballot for redundancy, auditors like the paper trail, and so I would also insist that we don't lose that. It actually makes us special.
Voter suppression is as old as this country, too. Voting used to be reserved for white males who had land. Women didn't get to vote until the 20th century. African Americans have continually and historically been suppressed in terms of their going out to vote. And unfortunately, that's a sad story of our country. But we have seen what happens when we gather out and we go out to the communities, we bring in new communities, immigrant communities, the Somali community, the Hmong community, the Latino community, and let them know that they do have a right to vote and that no one can take that away from them. But I also think we have to look at some other alternatives. In the city of St. Paul and in the city of Minneapolis this last year, during municipal elections, we had some of the highest voter turnout we have ever seen because they have ranked choice voting. It was a system that I was not necessarily a big fan of. But when you look at the results and you look at how people came out and enthusiastically voted because they had a choice to vote for a second and a third opportunity, I think it's something that we need to look. It's not just about not suppressing the vote. It is encouraging voters to come out and have the energy to do that.
Well, this is one of the numerous reasons I'm happy when I wake up in the morning I'm a Democrat, when you hear people talk about this. This is a proud tradition of ours of making sure people have access to that fundamental thing that separates us from all others, the right to participate and have a voice in how we govern. Everything that's been said here is right, making it easier to register to vote, making sure we restore the rights of felons once they come back and are able to participate once again, making sure we do the education piece, and yes, once again, inspiring people to want to vote for something, that it's not just good enough to be against something and see what we're united together to get out there. Again, the ranked choice voting people, it's encouraging to me in our democracy to see the passion that they have. So I think as governor, these are things that we look at, anything that encourages us to go forward. But I do want to also, as everyone else I think said, is thank Steve Simon, who was a champion out there against Chris Kobach's ridiculous attempt to hijack our democracy. Those are things that will unite us. Those are things that our neighbors agree with. Those are things that poll incredibly high, that we should get out there and implement those things to make it easier for people to vote, to feel more ownership in their state.
We have time for one last question before we give our closing comments. Tina, you're going to be the first person to answer this question. There is a serious shortage of licensed child care providers all over the state, which impacts families and local employers. How will you address this critical issue?
Anybody who's a parent in this room knows that if your child is not in a safe place and you don't have confidence in who's taking care of them, it's really hard to work. And so we need really good, high-quality child care to let our families get ahead, but the cost is just prohibitive. Part of the problem is that wages are so low. I mean, there are many pieces to this, and I can't discuss them all in 1 minute. But we have to raise wages because people cannot afford to get child care. That is part of the bucket of things. That's part of how they decide what a living wage is. And you cannot really have a basic standard of living in the metro area without about $19 an hour. So ordinary families are really struggling. We need to expand our child care assistance program. That's one thing, but there are a lot of other pieces of this as well.
This is an issue I hear about from parents, but more importantly from businesses all across the state. It's a huge economic development issue for us. It's pretty straightforward what we do. We need to put about $250 million more into our child care system to bring up rates, to pay workers more, and to allow those businesses to survive. We need to reduce some of the regulations that are imposed on them and some of the training requirements, and we need to provide startup funds for local communities to kind of start systems when there's not one existing in their community. But I just want to talk about one other thing here. One of the things I'm a little disappointed about today is we didn't at one question about racial disparities, which is the crisis that we're facing in this state. We're the second most unequal state in the country. If there's one legacy we could leave over the next 10 years, all of us together, it would be to make sure that we move from the second most unequal state in the country to the most equal state in the country, and we're not going to get there until we start talking about it. So I hope when we have these further discussions through the course of this campaign, that is one of the central issues we're talking about in every discussion that we have.
Let's just focus on the College of Education and Human Development. This just highlights what's going on right now. So they've had a child care program that there's been a waiting list for. They've had it for 45 years, University of Minnesota, and they announced recently they're going to close it. And Catherine Pearson has a child in that program, and you may know who she is. She speaks on TPT Almanac quite often, and it just goes to show there's a great demand for these programs. I think that's going backwards. We shouldn't be closing programs like that in places like University of Minnesota. We should be expanding. So we have a shortage of licensed daycare providers. Let's try to provide the space around the state, in the Minnesota state system, in those buildings, our K-12 buildings, University of Minnesota, and then figure out what else it is we need to do. Also, we know for affordability, which wasn't really asked about, there's subsidies and tax credits which we need to make sure that we shore up. But at the end of the day, we need to solve the problem community by community.
Taking care of our children is the most important thing that we do, and then we don't put the resources in to actually suggest that that is our belief system. We pay our child care workers at minimum wage with no benefits, long hours, and very difficult working conditions. So we have to professionalize it. We have to make sure that we expand tax credits for parents. We have to provide all of those things. I think Paul did a very good job of outlining the opportunities that we have here. But the fact of the matter is, if we do believe that child care, if we do believe that the future generations are our most important thing that we can do in the state, then we need to actually start treating it like a profession, start paying people what they're worth, and expanding opportunities to do those things. Can I just add also, I agree with Paul on this issue of racial disparities. Paul's been a champion on that. I would encourage anyone to look at what we've done in the city of St. Paul for the last 12 years to really try to create an equitable and a just society for everyone that lives and works and comes to the city of St. Paul.
Well, once again, colleagues are right. This is a huge issue out in rural Minnesota. It's an economic issue. It touches all of us. The things we can do is fully fund CCAP, making sure that's our partnering with employers to make sure we have on-site child care, quality child care. The idea of going down and having lunch with your kids at noon, anybody who's ever done that, it's very high. But it's about building the coalitions to get this done. My ticket looks different because I have a running mate, Peggy Flanagan, state representative, who was the leader of the Children's Defense Fund in Minneapolis, or in Minnesota, and focused on these issues. And on the racial disparity piece, this is true. It's different on how we do it. It's cultural competency. Peggy is an Ojibwe woman from the White Earth Nation, and that brings us diversity to how we build coalitions to solve an issue that touches every family. But it is not the same in every place. It's not the same of how we get there. But asking those folks who are culturally competent to deliver that care in a manner that impacts those children has far-reaching, and the research shows it, far-reaching positive implications, and that's what we can do in Minnesota.
I was at the home of a couple last night named Amanda and Charlie. Charlie is a teacher in Minneapolis, and he's leaving work at the end of next week to be home to take care of their infant because they can't really afford child care. His salary doesn't equal it. So he's leaving the workforce. He's going to leave the workforce for a year, and this is a story for working people, for families across the state of Minnesota. And it is true that we have to pump more money in to increase rates. We can't just raise the wage. That won't solve this problem. But across the state, communities are stepping up. I was just in New York Mills just last week at a roundtable talking about how they are working to solve their child care crisis in that community. At the table, the mayor, city councilors, the county board, people from Head Start, the Economic Development Authority, and the head of the largest employer. And they believe when they have solved their problem and they're 2 years into finding a solution, they need a little startup money from the state. If they do, they will not only attract and hold their workforce at their largest employer, but they believe people will come to New York Mills to live and work.
Now we're going to wrap up with 2-minute closing comments, and we're back in sequence with the first person, and that will be Paul Thissen.
The thing that I want to leave with you is I really do think, and it came up on that election integrity question a little bit, we are at war in this country. There is a war going on by a small and concentrated group of people that have all the economic and political power, and they want to hold on to that with everything they can. And you see that in the campaigns that are run, and you see that in the policies that are adopted. Again, this point when the Senate passed their tax bill, giving billions of dollars of tax cuts to folks when they were cutting children's health care and said they couldn't afford to pay for children's health care. That's what this war is about. That's what's at stake here.
They're angry because they're working harder and harder and falling further and further behind. And they're going to talk about resistance. Resistance to a president right now who has no business occupying the Oval Office that Barack Obama occupied. They're going to talk about that Republican tax bill that was passed in Congress that gave more tax breaks to millionaires and billionaires. And they're going to talk about their frustrations. And they're going to talk about resistance. But it's not enough to resist. We have to talk about what our vision is for the future of the state of Minnesota. And we have to talk about what we as Democrats are going to stand up and fight for. We have to fight for racial equality across the state of Minnesota. And to make sure that every child, regardless of who they are, where they're born, their country of national origin, that they have the same opportunity to grow up and be successful that I had as a kid growing up in the city of St. Paul. We're going to talk about the future of our economy. We're going to talk about a green and clean economy that is powered by wind and solar power. and Minnesota becoming an internationally recognized leader in the fight against climate change. We're going to continue to fight on those very progressive things that have made Minnesota great over generation after generation after generation. And when we stand up, when we look people in the eye, we tell them what we stand for, and then deliver on that promise, we will lead Minnesota into the future. I want to be your next governor to lead that fight. Thank you so much.
Well, again, thank you to Sue and CD2. Thank you to these great public servants who are here to improve the lives for all of us and countless millions of others. And thank you to all of you. You're engaged. You're here. But you think about how special it is to sit in an afternoon with your neighbors. Literally billions of people around the world can't imagine the opportunity to be able to gather and self-govern, to make a decision that is going to impact us for a generation. Who do we choose to be the next governor of Minnesota? Who can build the coalitions necessary to start saying, what does that Minnesota horizon look like? I grew up in a small town, had 24 kids in my class, I say 12 were cousins. That public school, though, provided an incredible education. I watched as my father died and my mother was getting back to work, but there were programs, there were smart programs like Social Security survivor benefits that made a difference. I joined the military when I was 17, used the GI Bill. I've talked in Congress and worked with Ted Kennedy. Everyone should have the opportunity to serve their nation, but not in uniform. We should be doing a national service program. And that's how we talk about paying for college, by getting folks to work in our national parks, working and teaching in schools. Those are things that we can do. An aspirational politics that is bigger, not trying to figure out how to divide ourselves, but how to draw more people in.
I'm running for governor because I believe in the kind of politics that improves people's lives, and when we use it together, we can build a bright future for the people of Minnesota, and I want to do that with you. When I think about that bright future, it includes strong public schools for our kids, health care you can count on when you're sick, and looking ahead and making sure we're building the infrastructure and the jobs of our future so we can support ourselves with our hard work. But I believe in a kind of politics that digs into the tough issues. Let us take on climate change and build the renewable energy economy of our future for our clean air and our clean water. Let us recognize that we do have structural racism in the state of Minnesota, and if we don't take that on, we are not the Minnesota leaders I believe that we are. Let's recognize that we can, if we move the NRA away from the negotiating table, we can enact common sense gun violence prevention and solutions in the state of Minnesota, and we should. It's time for us to recognize that we can also tackle sexual harassment to make sure our workplaces and our communities are safe. I believe in our capacity to do this. There are some people who suggest that because we might lose this next election that we need to be cautious, but I don't think so. I think it is time for us to stand up for an honest and progressive vision for the people of Minnesota. That is how we win an election. That is how we can govern and lead the state of Minnesota.
I've had the honor of serving as your state auditor now for almost 12 years or 3 terms. And I have an exciting agenda that's been informed by our fellow Minnesotans statewide. And I say we're at a watershed moment where people are tired of fear. Fear of losing health care security. Fear of their child not having health care. Fear of going to, into bankruptcy. And I contend it's time to do something really, really different.
Unlike everybody up here, I'm not somebody who thought I was going to run for governor at some point in the future. I got in for a couple of reasons. 2016 happened, and like many of you, I had to get out and fight for the Minnesota that I want and for the nation that I believe we should have, in spite of what happened in Washington, D.C. And I believe that the way we win is to be very clear with Minnesotans that we are for them.
Thank you again for coming. We have some time to schmooze, some snacks outside. And again, don't forget to attend.